Allow me to present to you the Coherence Principle. By the end of this presentation, you'll be able to understand how important it is to avoid adding any material to your presentation that does not support the instructional goal. The explanation is very wordy and most definitely can be weeded out so as not to overload your cognitive load, or as better known as your working memory. Let's try this again. Much better. So when you are applying the coherence principle to your everyday instruction, particularly thinking of myself as a classroom teacher, you only want to include what is necessary. Make sure you take out anything, removing and weeding out what isn't needed, and that anything that's included in your presentation should only be there to support your instructional goal. There are a couple things you need to be aware of when using the coherence principle in your instruction. You need to make sure that it is relevant, it is clear, and it is consistent. And this applies to when you're using audio, words, and graphics. We always prefer audio, spoken word, over text, simplifying the text, and getting more descriptive in your audio. And any graphics are only there to support your instructional goal and nothing too extra. Even on some of my slides, you'll see that there are a couple graphics that are more just for visual appearance, which will also kind of go against the coherence principle in this presentation as well. With the help of my coworkers, I was able to dive in to find an example of when the coherence principle was not applied. In our math curriculum, we use Pearson. And although I really enjoy the Pearson curricula overall, there are a couple ways in which it really does more harm than good. The first example would be irrelevant visuals. There's a lot of graphics of people with speech bubbles, which aren't necessary, and it's distracting. The students will spend time coloring in the people on the page rather than trying the problem on the page. Pearson also tends to give varying examples, which means that students are using multiple strategies in the same lesson. There's often unclear expectations of what they're supposed to be doing or what strategy they are trying to use, and typically the students end up getting too overwhelmed and end up having to step away from their work. On the offset, there is a great time and many examples I came up with in my head of when I found success in the coherence principle. Looking back on it now, I didn't realize what it was at the time, but now I can. So I did a lesson on the solar system looking at the different planets and descriptors, um, including only relevant visuals, and I included an acronym to help memorize the planet order. Um, Avoiding unnecessary information, so I didn't include anything about the extra moons on the different planets. I kept it very simple, comparing the planets in the same way all across the solar system. And also narrated it in a specific order. So I started with the sun, which is the center of the universe, and then going out from the closest planet to the sun all the way out to the furthest planet of the sun. And some of you might understand why Pluto is in parentheses. It depends who you ask if you include Pluto, although I did teach it as a dwarf planet to my students. And I managed the cognitive load by only doing one planet or star per slide. Obviously, the sun's a star, so that's why I included that in this presentation, but only including one planet per slide so that the students could focus on one piece of the solar system at a time.
When comparing the coherence principle alongside the modality principle, their common goals include reducing the cognitive load, enhancing classroom effectiveness. That includes elements that should align with the learning objectives for your specific lesson. However, they diverge in their approaches with how they use the material. The coherence principle centers on making sure that the material is connected and presented coherently, while the modality principle emphasizes presenting the material through different modalities. Um, the coherence principle also prioritizes relevance within context, while the modality principle focuses on optimizing sensory channels for each learner. Looking at the advantages and drawbacks of employing the coherence principle, one notable advantage is reducing the amount of unnecessary information. However, a corresponding disadvantage would be the risk of oversimplifying your presentation or lesson, potentially removing necessary or essential details. In utilizing the coherence principle, it typically results in improved comprehension and attention amongst students. You can foster a more efficient presentation in this way. Conversely, it also provides limitations on creativity, making it challenging to innovate your presentation style and your content display. This approach also tends to restrict the depth of content engagement, leading to more of a surface level understanding and lacks effectiveness for students. I would recommend incorporating the coherence principle into your instructional approach, as it does prove to be beneficial, especially for learners who can be easily overwhelmed and possess a lower working memory compared to their peers. It's essential also to understand that one size approach does not fit all. Alongside the coherence principle, we've explored a couple other principles like the modality and the redundancy principle most recently. It's crucial not to rely solely on one principle for your instructional method. Instead, a more effective approach would be integrating multiple principles to cater to the diverse needs of the learners in your classroom. While each principle has its merits, they all operate within certain limitations.